The next G is about being grounded. And we think that it is really important that as professionals, we draw from the wisdom of our profession. We know a lot now about learning, and it's imperative that we apply that. We use the term evidence-informed as opposed to data-driven. Data-driven does not inspire teachers in our province. Seeking evidence, and one of the mindsets that we wrote about in Leadership Mindsets was the importance of having an evidence-seeking mindset. So taking a look around and saying, what supports this action that we're taking? We found the work from the nature of learning through the OECD research study extremely valuable in our context. And these 7 learning principles are infusing what we're doing in our schools and are forming the framework as schools are getting together to say, where are we going to put our time, energy, and focus, and what's going to make the most difference to our learners, knowing that all 7 of these are important to deepen student learning. Okay? How many of you have seen the nature of learning or seen this research? Okay, so it's an invitation. It's easily available on the OECD website. The document itself is a bit dense, but there is a practitioner's guide that's actually written in everyday English that our schools are finding extremely helpful. So we're looking for strong evidence sources. The second big area for us is with the networks, with the schools that we've been working with, and we also teach a graduate program at Vancouver Island University, really emphasize the importance of assessment for learning. And the work of Dylan William and Shirley Clark and other incredibly intelligent people from the UK has really, really informed our thinking. And we say, because we can as university faculty to our graduate students, we say that if we have the evidence source about what makes a difference to student learning, and we know the effect size for formative assessment if we use all 5 strategies as a team across the school is about between 0.7 and 0.8. It makes a huge difference to student learning. If we know that and we ignore it and just continue on with our old practices, we say it's the educational equivalent of malpractice. Okay? Now, that's kind of a harsh statement, but it does get people's attention. So for us, it's really, really important that we draw on the grounded nature of our profession and the evidence there. We've also found the work of John Hattie from New Zealand extremely important. And Visible Learning for Teachers is an extremely useful resource that our schools are just drawing on in a natural way when they've got a question. So our 4th G is around being grounded. Now, this is, we're from Vancouver. Vancouver Canucks are our hockey team. Andy introduced the Vancouver Giants yesterday in the hockey metaphor. There's a term in hockey called the grinder. The grinder is the guy that goes into the corner and puts his body at risk to dig out the puck. And their job is to get the puck and get it out to the goal scorer to score a goal. They're not the stars. They don't get a lot of glory, but they're often the fan favorites because they're just so hard working. So we like the notion of grinding, that this is to shift a system. It requires the people that are willing to go into the corners, into the boards, take some abuse, hopefully not terrible abuse, but take some abuse because there's going to be blowback, and just stick with it because the outcome is just so important. So grinders, and we need to do it as a group. So we've been working with a network in BC for the last 13 years, and it's shifted and morphed over the years, but the impact is we're actually seeing quite a significant impact now. When schools come together, work as a collective unit on some shared goals using an inquiry framework. So at different points, we've had about half of the schools have been involved, and our goal is not to have every school be part of the network. Our goal is that every school will have the opportunity to learn from another school. And how can we speed up the connecting the brilliant pockets of work that are existing in all of our schools? And so that's been our challenge. We've had lots of teachers involved, and a lot of students have been impacted by this. And over the last 7 or 8 years, we've worked with about 350 graduate students who are now moving into leadership positions in a fairly significant way. So it's that teamwork as a group that we're seeing is so important. We did some work with Louise Stoll a couple of years ago. She was working with a network of 16 schools in Ealing in London, and to take a look at what were some of the factors that created deeper forms of school-to-school learning. And we encourage you to take a look at the book through Routledge, but I just want to focus on two big points here. The first one is trusting relationships, and Michael and Andy talked about that yesterday. What we see, and we've drawn on the work of Tony Brick and Barbara Schneider in Chicago, we really see that the 4 points that they've identified in the trust research is important for us to think about as school leaders thinking to form more networks. The first one, they have 4 factors. The first is respect, and that comes from listening to diverse points of view. So in our networks, it's really important to us that they not be homogeneous, but they reflect a diversity, because we can learn so much from different perspectives. So respect is the first one. Integrity, which is following through, doing what you say you're going to do. Personal regard, knowing the people that you're working with. And the 4th one is competence in core responsibilities. And as school leaders, what that means is that in our schools, if there's a situation that is damaging to learners, about which we do nothing, then trust is eroded. So we need to think about how, as we start to work together as a group, are we going to tackle some of those difficult situations. The other point from the trust literature is that the person with the perceived power, sometimes as school leaders, we don't feel like we've got the power, but we are perceived to, needs to make themselves vulnerable first. So we need to take that first step of trying something and seeing how it's going to go, and do that in a public way. We ask all of our schools to share their inquiries, share what they've done, share what they've learned at the end of the year in regional celebrations or showcases of learning. And sometimes things haven't worked very well. We need to create the conditions where it's okay to say, this is what we were hoping for, this is what we tried, this is what happened as a result, and this is what we're going to do next. So the trust comes from telling the truth about what works and what doesn't work. Does that make sense to you? Okay. That's been, it's just been really important in our context that we don't blow smoke, is our term, that we're actually telling the truth. The other point that I want to just touch on is shared measures. We've been very fortunate in our setting, in our province, to have a set of learning progressions in core areas like reading, writing, math problem solving, social responsibility, oral language development, and also in Aboriginal understandings that help teachers first of all, determine how much growth they're seeing in their learners, but also helps the sharing across schools when people are using the same measures. So that's been a critically important part for us of accelerating the pace of change. We had an impact study that was done last year. It was funded by the federal government on what difference does it make to participants in this particular network, which was focused on Aboriginal learners under the umbrella group. And it was a very useful study, and the link is on our website so you can take a look at it. But it was the importance the researchers found of developing the spaces for shared engagement and collaboration. Spaces both within the school and across the schools. And the other big finding was that Coming together as a group in this shared network space actually serves as a catalyst for action. People feel compelled to do something. They feel encouraged and motivated to make the changes because they know they're accountable to each other. And they can't just come to meetings, have their tuna fish sandwich. We're very richly endowed. They get a cracker sometimes. But there is that kind of feeling that I have to do something because my colleagues expect it. And it also creates a space for sustained learning. We've been at this for a while, and we need to stick with it for the foreseeable future. So we were encouraged by that and motivated to keep going. And here are just a couple of comments that came through from the teachers who were involved in the participating in this study. I really like the notion of being involved in a networked inquiry. It's not evaluating methods as good or bad, but wondering, tweaking, applying, revising, sharing, and wondering some more. And this one, we've seen evidence of this with hundreds of teachers, that once they've worked together in a networked way using inquiry as their basis, they just can't go back to their old ways, which is deeply encouraging. So the sixth part of this is generating an inquiry framework. We've been very fortunate to work together for quite a while, and also to work with Helen Timperley from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And Helen has been working with a literacy strategy, a networked approach to inquiry, networked approach to literacy using an inquiry framework. And there was quite a bit of money invested into this. Every school in New Zealand participated in it for a 2-year period with quite rich funding. Her question was, what happens after the funding dries up? And went back to the schools 3 years later. And what she found was that the schools that continued to apply the strategies that they had learned during the intensive intervention, they maintained their growth trajectory. Kids were still doing well. The big point, though, was in the schools that had taken the inquiry framework and made it an ongoing way of their professional lives in the schools, the achievement rates had increased. So even without the resources. So in taking a look at the experience in New Zealand and the case studies of our schools, together we developed a framework for inquiry that we shared in the earlier workshop sessions. And we just encourage you to think about, would this work in your setting? Where we start with the experiences of the learners. We start by really being curious about what's going on for our learners, how do we know, and why does it matter? Quite often, our observation has been with action research projects or other forms of inquiry that we start with an interest of the teacher. And in this one, or an interest of the school, or an interest of the parents or the governing board, what we're saying is let's focus, first of all, on getting a deep understanding of the experiences of our learners, and then building from that. And our last G is generosity. And we've learned this. This is the work of Susan Point. Have any of you been to Vancouver? Great. And so as you came through the airport, there are some wonderful wooden carvings. And she is the artist. So if it looks faintly familiar, this is her work. What we've learned from our Indigenous colleagues, that we show we build our influence by giving things away. And that we increase our influence through the quality of the gifts that we give. So within our networks, schools are expected to give away freely the resources that they've developed, the ideas that are working for them, to share openly and broadly across other schools, with the caveat or the expectation that they acknowledge the source. So I say, we learned this from Skaha Lake School, and we're applying it here. We learned this from Elphinstone, and we're applying it there. So we can strengthen the networking by acknowledging where we've learned from. And one of the really interesting examples of international generosity is coming through the Innovative Learning Environment Project through the OECD. This started in 2008, and it started with this question: what if learning environments were designed around the needs of the learners? And that led to a study of learning, which led to the publication of the Nature of Learning. It also led to 45 countries around the world participating openly and in a spirit of generosity and submitting case studies. We think this is a pretty good idea, and writing it up and sending it in. They're all available on the OECD website, the case studies, and we found them invaluable. We have our grad students go in, take a look, find a school that is of interest to them, that's either very similar or totally different, it doesn't matter. Learn a little bit more about the school, and let us know what they're going to apply as a result of what they've learned. And a specific example would be a very small rural school in northern BC. One of the teachers discovered a nature school in Israel, was really attracted by how they were getting the kids more connected to the land, got in touch with the school, formed a connection with a teacher there, and this year they're working as a team of schools, Israel and British Columbia, exploring the same ideas. And the Israeli school just openly and generously provided all of the information to them. So we're thinking about how can we be generous within our networks, but across as well. There are 5 international learning labs that are taking place as part of this project over the next 3 years or next couple of years. We're excited to be part of this project, and British Columbia was invited for 3 reasons. One, because of the continued and sustained emphasis on school-to-school networks. 2, the leadership development programs that are really focused on using the inquiry framework. And 3, a provincial approach to curriculum redesign that's just been rolled out. So that's what we're exploring. What's the impact of that, and what are we learning from it? It's really interesting to hear what the other countries are doing. And without going through all of them, we'll just say that Peru is a particularly interesting case because it's a small group of schools in one particular area that are quite well resourced. These are private schools, and they are saying, what is it that we can learn about learning and teaching and changing practice that we can share with all of Peru? So their motivation is to build both equality and equity across the country by sharing what they're learning in a well-resourced area, which we just think is pretty nifty. And Belgium is also a really interesting case. This is French Belgium. They have a culture of failure, that we show that we have high standards by failing children in primary. And of course, the evidence dispels that is a good practice, and it is very hard to change a culture that has been so entrenched. So they're working really, really hard with communities to how do we change a whole culture that has been so ingrained in a particular practice. So there's lots for us to learn. We love the spirit of generosity. We love that this is all freely available. The internet has become an enormous repository for teachers and the ability to share. And we think that the more spirit of openness that we can bring to this work, the better for all of us. So we have the 7 Gs. The growth mindset, having powerful, hard goals, having grit, both ourselves as a profession and developing that with our learners, being really grounded in the knowledge of our profession, kind of how do we form groups that will grind it out together? How can we generate an inquiry framework that will work in our context and that is agreed upon? And how do we share and enter into this work with that spirit of generosity? Because that's what it's going to take for us together. So what we're going to ask you to do is just to turn and talk again for 2 minutes and say which of these 7 points really kind of sticks with you or makes the most sense to you, and which one would you be willing to explore a little bit more as a collection of schools in your setting. Okay, so 2 minutes, and then we will pull this together. So thank you very much. We're just going to wrap with a couple of comments each about intelligent accountability. I had at one point, Linda and I were both senior policy advisors in our Ministry of Education, and my job was to develop an accountability framework for the province. Linda's job was to take charge of learning and curriculum in the province. So they were just little jobs that we had. We made some mistakes with our accountability framework, and I say that with all honesty. It was too tight, it was too smart, it wasn't open enough for teacher judgment and for school judgment, and fortunately, as we left government and started to work with networks and work with an inquiry focus, we're seeing that shift. And we're seeing lots of districts now are taking the inquiry framework as the basis for their school planning, as opposed to the more narrow, rigid, kind of bureaucratic measures that we had. So my observation would be, or my invitation would be, for you to figure out how you can be accountable to each other, to your communities, to the parents that you serve, to your learners, and make that very public in a way that people can understand. Our parents could not understand our school growth plans, nor could most of the people within the school. They were way too complicated. So let's make it simple, let's make it clear, let's make it transparent, and let's make it accessible to our communities.
Intelligent accountability. Well, I think that the most important thing is that we develop really powerful learning progressions around the competencies needed for this century. I don't really like saying the 21st century, but we in our province, our curriculum redesign is having, people right now are working on getting developmental progression so that we can see if we're helping each learner develop a strong personal identity as well as a social identity, because we think that that's a really important competency for them moving into a world filled with unknowns. If they don't know themselves, we think bad things happen to them socially in a networked world. A second competency area, there are people and they're using the ideas of this, 2 of your speakers from here, the creativity progressions that are also part of the OECD work. I think that, when we think of the British tradition, we think of Dunkirk and that spirit of going out and really helping other people. But, we also think of the incredible creativity of the drama, the dance, the music, the design, the architecture, name a thing. People in these various islands have done it. And even, I understand that the culinary tradition has really improved too. And I saw that in the appetizers. I thought bangers and mash as an appetizer, with your glass of wine. That has got to be really forward thinking, because it really sticks to your ribs. You feel like you're getting something. Critical thinking, we need learning progressions for that too. And that's what we need to be reporting on, I think, to our parents and learners be able to show their e-portfolios, their digital videos, that this is what we're getting good at. And we would call those existence proofs. So it's very hard to build a powerful accountability system that's intelligent if you don't have examples of what it is that you're trying to do. And I think as I heard some schools from Wales, some schools from here, who are doing highly intelligent things, we need to build our new systems around that really, really smart work and test it out. So just by way of concluding, when Judy was talking about the innovative learning environment work, which is built around those 7 learning principles, the concluding conference of the developmental part of that work will be held in Paris next November 3rd to the 5th. So if that work interests you, you might try exploring how you could be a part of that, because there's a lot of innovative energy, I think, in the collective.
So we'll just end with this quote. We love Dorothy Parker, and you know we're passionate about having our learners leave curious and not be bored. So we just encourage you to maintain your curiosity, your passion, to have some fun with this work, and to stay connected. And we are just so honored to be part of this and be part of your extended network and to be friends. So thank you. So we're done.